Retrogrades are some of the most misunderstood events in astrology. If you've spent any time on social media, you've probably heard people say things like, "Mercury retrograde ruins everything," or "Don't sign anything, don't travel and expect chaos." But the truth is, retrogrades are not cosmic disasters. In astrology, retrogrades are actually a normal part of planetary cycles, and they happen many times throughout the year. Instead of being periods of bad luck, retrogrades are more accurately understood as times of review, reflection, and adjustment. During these cycles, the energy of the planet involved tends to turn inward. That's why retrogrades often bring up unfinished business, old memories, or situations that need to be revisited. In this video, we're going to separate retrograde myths from reality. We'll talk about why retrogrades get such a bad reputation, what's actually happening astrologically when a planet goes retrograde, how retrogrades can affect your emotions and mental state, and most importantly, what to do and what not to do during retrograde periods. Once you understand how retrogrades really work, they stop being something to fear and start becoming something you can actually use to your advantage. Let's take a closer look. One of the biggest reasons retrogrades get such a bad reputation is because of how they're talked about online. Social media tends to turn retrogrades into something dramatic or chaotic, when in reality they're a normal and predictable part of astrology. Let's start with one of the most common myths. Myth number 1 is Mercury retrograde ruins everything. If you've heard anything about retrogrades before, it's probably this one. People blame Mercury retrograde for lost emails, broken technology, travel delays, and misunderstandings. But the reality is that Mercury retrograde doesn't suddenly create chaos out of nowhere. Here's the reality. Mercury retrograde tends to reveal problems that were already there. Mercury governs communication, information, and technology. When Mercury goes retrograde, it slows down those areas so we can notice mistakes, miscommunications, or things that were overlooked. Instead of causing problems, Mercury retrograde often exposes what needs to be corrected or clarified. The second myth is retrogrades are bad luck. Another common belief is that retrogrades are unlucky periods when everything goes wrong. But in astrology, retrogrades are not about bad luck at all. Here's the reality. Retrogrades are periods of review. When a planet appears to move backward in the sky, astrologically it represents energy turning inward rather than moving forward. That's why retrogrades are often associated with things like reflection, revisiting old ideas, reconnecting with people from the past, or reconsidering decisions. They're less about pushing forward and more about looking back and making adjustments. The third myth: nothing should be done during retrogrades. Some people believe that during a retrograde you should avoid making any decisions, signing contracts, or moving forward with anything important. But life doesn't stop every time a planet goes retrograde. Here's the reality. Retrogrades are better for reviewing than starting brand new things. This is why astrologers often say retrogrades are good for the following: editing, revising plans, finishing unfinished projects, reconnecting with past ideas, or re-evaluating goals. Rather than shutting life down, retrogrades simply shift the focus from forward motion to reflection and adjustment. And because retrogrades turn attention inward, they can also have an effect on our emotional and mental state. That's why many people notice that during retrograde periods, old memories resurface, emotions feel stronger, or there's a greater need for rest and reflection. So next, let's talk about retrogrades and mental health, and why people sometimes feel more anxious or introspective during these cycles. Because retrogrades turn planetary energy inward, they can sometimes affect how we process emotions and thoughts. Many people notice that during retrograde periods they feel more reflective, more introspective, or even more mentally tired than usual. This doesn't mean something is wrong. It often means that the mind is working through things that were previously pushed aside. Retrogrades tend to bring unfinished emotional material back into awareness. That can include memories, unresolved conversations, past relationships, or situations that never fully reached closure. For some people, this can feel uncomfortable because it creates a sense of emotional looping. You may find yourself thinking about the same situation repeatedly, replaying past events, or analyzing conversations that happened weeks, months, or even years ago. But from an astrological perspective, this is actually part of the purpose of retrograde cycles. Retrogrades slow things down so that we can notice patterns that we might normally ignore when life is moving quickly. Another reason people sometimes feel different during retrogrades is mental fatigue. Because retrogrades encourage review and reflection, the mind can become more active internally. You may spend more time thinking, processing, remembering, or reconsidering decisions. This can sometimes feel like burnout or emotional exhaustion, especially if you've been pushing yourself too hard without taking time to rest. Retrogrades can also increase emotional sensitivity. Situations that might normally feel manageable may trigger stronger reactions because the mind is already in a reflective state. Small frustrations can bring up deeper feelings that have been sitting beneath the surface. But again, this isn't necessarily negative. In many cases, retrogrades simply create the conditions for emotional processing and psychological cleanup. They give us the opportunity to recognize patterns, reconsider choices, and sometimes finally deal with things that we've been avoiding. And when people understand that retrogrades are meant for reflection rather than constant forward motion, it becomes easier to move through these periods without unnecessary stress. Understanding this also helps explain why astrologers often talk about certain do's and don'ts during retrogrades. These aren't rigid rules, but they are helpful guidelines for working with the slower, more reflective energy of retrograde cycles. So next, let's look at what not to do during retrogrades, and what tends to work better instead. Once you understand that retrogrades are periods of review rather than forward momentum, it becomes easier to know what tends to work well during these cycles, and what can sometimes create unnecessary stress. Let's start with a few things that astrologers often recommend being cautious about during retrogrades. One of the most common areas is major commitments, especially contracts, purchases, or big launches. This doesn't mean you can't do these things at all. Life still happens during retrogrades. But because retrogrades tend to reveal overlooked details, it's wise to slow down and double-check everything. Read contracts carefully. Review the fine print. Make sure communication is clear. Retrogrades often expose misunderstandings that were already there, so taking a little extra time can prevent problems later. Another area to be mindful of is impulsive emotional decisions. Since retrogrades can bring up old memories and unresolved emotions, it's easy to react quickly to something that feels intense in the moment. For example, some people may suddenly decide to end a relationship, send a long emotional message, or confront someone about something from the past. Retrograde energy tends to favor reflection before reaction. Taking time to think things through usually leads to better outcomes than acting on the first emotional impulse. Technology and communication can also require a little more patience during retrogrades. Messages can be misunderstood, details can be missed, and plans may need to be adjusted. Again, this isn't about chaos. It's about slowing down enough to notice where something needs clarification. Now let's talk about what retrogrades are actually good for. Retrogrades are excellent periods for revisiting and refining. This can include things like editing projects, improving plans, reorganizing systems, or finishing something that was started earlier. Creative work often benefits from retrograde cycles because they encourage deeper thought and revision. Retrogrades are also powerful for healing and personal reflection. This is a good time for journaling, therapy, self-evaluation, and understanding emotional patterns. Because the mind naturally turns inward during retrogrades, it becomes easier to notice habits, beliefs, or reactions that might normally go unnoticed. And in many cases, retrogrades bring opportunities to reconnect with the past. Old friends may reappear. Past ideas may become relevant again. Projects that were abandoned may suddenly feel worth finishing. Instead of seeing retrogrades as disruptions, they can be understood as periods of adjustment that help us move forward more clearly later on. When we stop treating retrogrades as something to fear, they begin to make much more sense within the larger rhythm of astrology. Retrogrades are simply part of the cycle. Moments when life slows down long enough for us to reflect, reassess, and make necessary changes. So when it comes to retrogrades, the biggest takeaway is this: they're not disasters, and they're definitely not something to fear. Retrogrades are simply periods when planetary energy turns inward. Instead of pushing forward, the focus shifts to reviewing, reflecting, and making adjustments. They give us time to slow down, notice patterns, revisit unfinished situations, and sometimes gain clarity about things we might have missed before. And when you understand that retrogrades are part of a larger cycle, they start to feel a lot less chaotic and a lot more useful. Instead of asking what's going to go wrong during this retrograde, a better question might be, what is this retrograde trying to show me? Because very often, retrogrades highlight exactly what needs attention so that we can move forward more clearly once the planet goes direct again. If you found this video helpful, feel free to like the video and subscribe for more astrology content. And I'd love to hear from you in the comments. Have you ever noticed retrograde periods bringing old situations or memories back into your life? Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.